Nice to see you. I call it a conversation because that was the reason why this talk came into being. In addition to me needing to do a talk this morning as assigned by Diane, is I was asked to be on a webinar by the Episcopal Parish network, of which I'm on the board, so I guess they needed a filler there. And the webinar was an hour plus conversation in response to Presiding Bishop Curry's four-part reflection on thriving in the age of political disruption. And what Bishop Curry did is he talked about how, or ways in which he would respond, or he calls the church to respond, in four particular categories: Scripture and political witness, Christian tradition and the saints, when to address politics, and the impact of politics on the children of God. Those were the four things. And what happened in the course of this webinar is that we would watch little clips from Bishop Curry, and then the three commentators, of which I was one, would respond to what he said. And so what I want to do is share with you a little bit of how he framed these particular things, and additionally the things that we're doing here at Epiphany in response to a time that is, and I think this isn't a political thing to say, but in a time that is really going through some very significant seismic shifts culturally. And so we have a lot of change. And we have change that we're in the midst of, and some would say we have a lot more change coming, politically, technologically, environmentally. So we start with, let's see what my slides are here. If I can. Oh, I have to get rid of this. Do I have to get rid of that? I don't think I do. Oh, there we go. Yeah, good. Isn't that great? So want to see something really fun?
Oh, I'm so glad you bought that.
I mean, that's great. And then we can do this, which is even better. Okay, so just a minute. Those of you that are amazed, raise your hand. You're the ones that don't come to Bible study, because we use this at Bible study every week. But we don't have this. We don't have this up there, so it's very fun. Thank you to Brian. Big round of applause. So anyway, so Bishop Curry, the question was, how do you think about Scripture as political witness? And he told a story which I thought was just fabulous. I hadn't heard it, but I'll share it. I have now, and I'll share it with you. When he was bishop in North Carolina, where he was, I think, for 15 or 16 years, he had a sabbatical. And on his sabbatical, he decided he wanted to do a study of sermons given during the Civil War, leading up to the Civil War and given during the Civil War. And so he picked, and not just Episcopal services, though he picked Episcopal churches, but he picked the big churches, right, the leading Christian voices in the communities at the time. Baptist churches, Methodist churches, Episcopal churches, mostly Protestant churches. And he said he found out something that, I don't know if it surprised him, but it was very clear. That in the big churches in the South, they did not preach Jesus. They did not preach the gospel. Christian churches, right? But in defense of their position as the Confederacy in favor of slavery, they felt it easier to preach Old Testament stuff. Or maybe some strategic Paul stuff, but not Jesus. Now, Bishop Curry said, almost universally in the North, in the big Christian communities, they were talking about Jesus all the time. What would Jesus say about slavery? That was not a question they were asking in the South. And so Bishop Curry's reflection, and no surprise to any of us, is that preaching Jesus into whatever cultural situation is happening is the North Star for Christians. And if you hear within a time of flux and change and disorientation, people not preaching Jesus as their North Star, maybe look around. Or maybe wonder if there is not an alternative motivation to what they're doing. Jesus is always our North Star. And we know some things to be true about Jesus. Jesus came in to sanctify the world, right, by God's presence in an embodied state. Preacher talked about this a little on this Sunday. An embodied state. And he sanctified the world. How much of the world did Jesus sanctify? How much of the world did Jesus bless? All of it. Now, I'll use this here. All of it, right? There is, right? This is God's world. God made this world. Who did God make to be in this world? If you're here, God made you, right? And so we are loved and sanctified. We are here with purpose. There are no accidental people. Jesus will always give us that message. It's very clear. And so Bishop Curry said, when we're thinking about a world, think hard about Jesus, what Jesus is doing and how Jesus interacts. No surprise there here, is there? So that was one thing. He started off by talking about that. He talked about, and not to say there's not great prophetic voices in the Old Testament. Moses had a huge impact on the African American community under slavery in the South, right? What was Harriet Tubman's code name? Moses, right? So you can pick or choose in the Old Testament, but the Jesus filter will lead you into the good news of Jesus Christ. So that was one thing he talked about. The second thing he talked about, now watch this. The second thing he talked about, Christian tradition and the saints. And what he said was, when we have role models that can reflect for us through prior times how to live in the time in which we find ourselves. Here's the very interesting thing to note. And he talked about this, and we do this a lot here. We've done this very intentionally. I'll talk more about our preaching in a minute. But the thing, so let's think of a great saint who was Dietrich Bonhoeffer, right? Let's use Bonhoeffer as an example. Lex knows a thing or two about Bonhoeffer. So Bonhoeffer was a priest in Germany leading up to World War II. Bonhoeffer was a smart guy, well-connected, with a well-connected family. He had a lot of privilege. And one of the things that he was privileged to do is come study at Yale University. Correct me when I'm wrong on this, Lex. Just stop me. So he came to Yale, and the war's getting hot, and Hitler's getting wacky, and he's looking more wacky from here than inside. Because what happens when you're inside the crucible of change is sometimes it's hard to realize that you are in it. Right? You don't see it. It's like that frog in the water that's heating up slowly. But Bonhoeffer did, and he's here at Yale and with all the intellects thinking about what's going on in the world. And they say, look, Dietrich, you got to stay here. You can do more good here than going back there. You can be a voice of resistance, a theologian to write. And Bonhoeffer says, what? He says, I'm going home. I'm going back in, right? So he goes back in. Now, this is what Bonhoeffer did not know that you and I know now. He did not know what the outcome was going to be. It was not clear what the outcome of World War II was going to be. It's not clear how far Hitler would push the German people. That's always the problem in an age of disruption. We don't know the outcome. You do not know the outcome. And so the tension in this time is, do I stay at Yale or do I go back to Germany? Because you don't know what's going to happen. And you got to decide. And what Bonhoeffer knew is that he was doing this for the Lord. Right? If he anchored his life on the ways of Jesus, and he took that back into the German community, that no matter what happened to him, he would be okay, because he knew what we talk about here all the time. The bad thing is never the last thing. In a world of resurrection, in a world of eternity, in a world of love. And so did Bonhoeffer go back, make a difference, fight the good fight, and see it through to the end? Come out the other side? He did not. He was martyred. But his orientation, he made the decision, knowing that something was going on, to get in there and fight the good fight. Not knowing what the outcome would be, that takes great courage. Now, the great thing that we have, right, is we have him. And this is what Michael Curry was talking about. We have a tradition of people who stayed the course, who fought the good fight, who were martyred along the way because they knew that God had a plan and they were part of it, and they may suffer along the way, but they were going there. It's the whole story of the early church, incidentally. The entire story of the early church. And now the early church completely brought the Roman Empire to its knees. Crazy. Because they believed. And we have people that we can look back on to for inspiration when we're in it. Like, right, when we're called to go to Yale and looking back at the problem, or when we are in the middle of it, that we see that there's a pattern of faithfulness. And so part of what Bishop Curry was talking about is go back and look at those saints. Talked about Brother Lawrence today, right? But we've talked about a lot of other people here recently. Kate talked about John Newton a couple of Sundays ago. He was in it, right? They did not know the outcome of that. We talked about Mary McLeod Bethune, talked about here on my Easter Sunday. We talked about Reverend Wang in China, who was martyred by the Chinese government, bringing the words of Jesus into that community. Talked about Brother Lawrence. And so he said, so these are the things to call out, because we've seen it before. It doesn't look exactly like where we are, but we've seen the way Christians act in the past. So we have the Jesus filter, preaching Jesus, thinking about the Jesus. Doesn't mean occasionally the preacher can't preach about Paul in Acts. But we got our North Star. And anytime you're in a conversation with a Christian and you're talking about something controversial, I think it's fair to wonder, who doesn't love that? Old school, right? What would Jesus do? See, look at this. Isn't this so fun? And to think about the lives of the saints. Bishop Curry went on. There we go. When do you address politics? What does that mean? And what he talked about mostly was particularity and context. And he said what the neighborhood church does best is they address the things that everybody sees who lives in their community. And he says sometimes that happens through the pulpit, but mostly it happens through activities like we see going on right back here. Making sandwiches, right? And so what you see and what you hope for, what we see here at Epiphany, I can give you a lot of examples, is an acceleration or a lifting up of more community outreach. Or we're doing more cooking here than we've ever done, ever, right? We have more folks involved in organizations outside of the church that are connected back to the church than we've ever had. And what are the things that we're looking at so closely here in Seattle? Homelessness, right? Right, that's big, and feeding folks. And then also folks that are disenfranchised. The leadership work that Ann Beck does up at the U District, Teen Feed. Great example of that. It's not just feeding hungry kids, it's kids that have been disenfranchised by their communities and caring for them as well. And so he said, right, the meta politics, like the big cultural stuff, the stuff you see on CNN and Fox News and MSNBC and the stuff they talk about on, wherever they talk about Olympus, help me out. One of those shows like Brooks and Capehart or whatever, right? Those are interesting, possibly intellectually, but where Bishop Curry says you address politics is on the ground in the communities in which you live. And then you preach about that. How? By talking about what the community is doing, right? By sharing stories from the pulpit or in classes or about how are they living out this Jesus activity in the world around them. And one thing to know, folks might not know this, it came to our attention here a while ago that a lot of people in the parish have a lot of different interests politically out in the community. And they often come and they say, would the church get involved with this, or would the church do that, or do you want to be active in this, or do you want to be active in that? And so what we did, and nobody's taken us up on this, but what we did is at the bottom of At a Glance. Anybody get At a Glance? 3 of you get At a Glance. We have a place where if somebody's doing something that they want to invite other parishioners to do, they can fill out a form. They can go in and say, I'm going to this protest march, or I'm going to go to this event, and I'm leaving at the church at this time, at this date, and this is my number, and let me know if you want to go with me. Right? So that's not, and people can decide to go or not, right? That's completely, but we've put that in there for people who are going, not telling about things, but people who are going, to invite people to join them. That's to sort of connect with the local context of the community. Thing Bishop Curry talked about is the impact that the political shifts or changes or harms are taking place to people in the community. And he said the filter that Christians should think about, local churches, all churches, is the golden rule. It's super clear, right? If your activities, your actions, or the actions of your government can be run through the golden rule filter, then it's probably worthy. And if it can't be, it's probably a suspect. It's a very simple rule. Kids learned it early on. Adults forget it easily. And then to wonder what's happening here that we should be more attuned to. I'll give you a great example. We've been going to church next door to the Ukrainian Holy Trinity Orthodox Church for how many years? Like 70 plus, right? And we asked ourselves when the threat to the temporary protective status was going to be possibly revoked, and it may be revoked any day by the Trump administration, we probably should be paying a little more attention to the neighbors that live in the building that we share over 70 years. And so a group of active folks in service and outreach under the leadership of Amanda and the team that congregates asked the question, what responsibility do we have, or what can we do to be helpful to that community? And so we had a lot of folks think about that and did certain things that might be helpful to them. But what else did we do? And we're going to do it again. We had a potluck. That was fabulous. We learned a lot at that potluck. But what did we do as we got together? We told our stories. And I'll say more about the importance of that in a minute. But we just got together with the folks that are here who had a particular problem, and we can't fix that problem. We can do some things, but we can't fix that problem. But what we can do is we can know them, we can hear their stories, we can witness to their situation, and we can stand there as advocates and friends and partners in the face of their anxiety. And they have legitimate anxiety. And so the fourth thing that the Bishop Curry talked about was how do the events out there impact the children of God, and in particular, the children of God right in your room, right within your community. Those are 4 things he talked about. I want to talk a little bit about the things we've been thinking about here at Epiphany, even before I got invited into this conversation. But do you have any questions on this so far? Thoughts, reflections? While you're thinking, I'll erase that red line. Watch this. Now, the poor staff, we went on staff retreat, and we took this board. Oh. Rector prerogative. Well, let me touch this thing. That's not true. So as we entered in, most of you know this story, but as we saw the presidential election in November coming down the road, about a year before that happened, we asked ourselves, what's going on within our community, and what do we anticipate happening as a result of that election? And so what we saw going on in the community, locally and all over, is a sense of division, right? And a sense of polarization within our culture. And, people saying, they can't talk to their relatives, or all that tension. And so that was in the water. And then we also anticipated that the election, whoever won, because we didn't know who was going to win at the time, could be incredibly divisive. There could be, a lot happening. And so we asked ourselves, what are we going to do as a community to maybe help in a very small way mitigate against that, right? Or at least create deeper bonds of affection. And so what we did is we developed this class, Relata. Now, we were originally going to do a program called Alpha. We looked at that. It's a program that's been around since the 70s. But the community that we beta tested that Alpha program on said, that's not who we are. We're something different. So I'm like, now we have to write a whole program. So then we wrote the Relata. And the simple idea is to gather around the table and tell stories. And tell stories based on our lives. Stories are always the thing that helps rebuild relationship. And what we found with stories that we tell around the table, which is incredibly interesting, and it was something I didn't expect. The thing I love about Relata, incidentally, it was created by this whole congregation. We had a strong group that put it together, and then we iterated, continued to iterate based on the feedback. And one of the things that I found is when we got around the table, and once a couple of weeks have gone by, and a certain level of trust was established, that people moved from the stories of their achievement to the stories of their heart, to the stories of their suffering. And what we find when we tell stories of the hard things in our lives is binding, because everybody has hard things that take place in their lives, no matter what the level of achievement. Achievement often divides, suffering unites. And so around the table, communities get real. And the beauty of community being rewoven together is based on the tough things that go on in our life, based on trust. And when that happens, empathy ensues and community is healed. And that's pretty cool. And so that's one thing that Epiphany has done very intentionally and carefully, and we continue to carry that on in a significant way. So any reflections on that? Some of you have been part of that? Yeah? Couple of things. It's a good question. That's worthy of a survey, right? But we've also seen a number of people continue to do the different courses. We've seen a number of people step into the life of the parish, sort of continuing that community here. But we haven't done a full survey. It's really worth doing. We had a weekend Relata, I guess it's 2 weeks ago now, right? And then we have another one coming up in September. That's a great question.
Weekend format again?
No, the one in September is the 8-week series. The other thing we've always done, but we've been thinking about it more intentionally. You know how we do our sermons here at Epiphany? We have a team that gets together, we talk online, we review and critique sermons, then we do exegesis on the text together, and then the preacher has 10 days to write their sermon. And they write that sermon, and then they run it by Jad, our communication guy, to try to weave in our common language and also just tell us if it's any good. Or he never says that. He never says, "Oh my gosh." Occasionally he has said, "Maybe I ought to rethink the whole thing." But that doesn't happen too often. He does roll his eyes. You know. Yeah, you've witnessed this. We all have to do it. I do it. Lex does it. Kelly does it. Whoever's preaching, man, you run through the gauntlet. But it's important. And then we review it. So this sermon I just gave now, we'll review it on Tuesday. And that's how we learn, right? We're a learning system. It's like, my dad, when he was practicing medicine, you know what this is like, would do rounds, right? They do rounds, and they would talk about cases because it's a perpetual learning environment. We try to have it be a perpetually learning environment here at Epiphany as well. Clip?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you were saying about the importance of sermons being Christ-centered. But Relata, by and large, has not been Christ-centered. Now, what is the sense of that? Is that to change? Is there a movement? What is the theory behind that?
It's good question. Well, I'll address that. Clip said, church and pulpit and stuff, we think about Jesus a lot, but Relata, that hadn't been our orientation. And so our thought on that is the people in our parish that participate in Relata, I hope, have grown deeper in their relationship with the people around their tables. But the intent was a broader outreach, right? To bring people in and to give them a sense of hope. And to give them an opportunity to share their stories and get comfortable with their stories and have a vision that when they leave here, the people they see walking down the street, even if they don't know their stories, know they have a story. And hopefully that provokes empathy for connection and grace. But with regards to your specific question, Clip, the thing that we really have tried to do, and all of you have volunteered and many of you have, is to show Christian hospitality, right? To show what the Christian community looks like when it's acting like it should be acting. And too many folks in the world have encountered Christian communities that don't look like Christian communities that they think Christian communities should look like if they're followers of Jesus. And so that's been our witness. It should always be our witness, whether we're doing it for outsiders through Relata or we're doing it Sunday mornings here. But that's how we hope to share the love of God, by how we treat the people that come in here. George? Oh, we did a Christian Relata too, right? We Relata for Christians, Relata for the community. We are going to, and that we have to iterate on too. We learned a lot on that. We'll do that much better next time around. Back to preaching. So we have this communal structure, but the things that we've been talking about lately that are different as a result of a community in crisis is really thinking about the Jesus message, right? Really thinking about, and back to the Michael Curry point, but we were thinking about this, we've been thinking about this, complete stories of things that have already been done, right? So the story of John Newton, done. Bonhoeffer, done. Bethune, done, right? So stories, and then people can translate them, create their own data lines to those stories. How does that story fit into the culture in which I'm living? That's the first thing. The second thing we've done is try to make stories specific to the preacher, not universal. Kate did a great job of that last Sunday, talking about her relationship with transgender community, right, and her experience and vision of that. That wasn't for the whole congregation. It was about her shift in frame about a particular issue. Now, maybe that's a shift a lot of us have taken, right? That could be the case. And she wasn't telling everybody they must take that, but she was modeling something in particular to her life. And so we're trying to find specific examples. When I told the story of Mrs. Constant, particular story, right? About Haiti, about immigration, but a particular story. So the stories we're trying to find in our preaching, we're trying to make them particular to the preacher, particular to a person, And people can then decide what they want to do with that story, right? That's on the congregation. In the same way, when we look at a completed event, you get to decide how you want to translate that. One thing that we know is we have a lot of thinking people in our pews. Telling them what to believe is not necessarily helpful, but letting them draw their own lines. So that's how we're thinking about preaching. It's a little bit different. And Jad in his, let's see, there we go. The other thing, Nicola's been a big part of this that we've been thinking about is grief. And grief's always been around, right? Grief is the thing that we experience because we're human, because we go through suffering, and because we have loss of relationship. But we've been thinking about it a little more deeply. A while back, we developed a group of folks that have one-on-one relationships with people who are suffering with grief, right? Walking next to folks. One thing that we're seeing is grief is almost magnified within the culture right now, right? There's a sort of a meta-grief that can soak into individual grief that makes it even more acute and hard to manage. So having Nicola teach this extraordinary class that she is teaching, The Art of Grief, we have the grief partners, we have Living After Loss, we have a woman coming in that's going to talk about grief. And so we're being even more attentive to grief than we have, than just generally in our pastoral life. So that's something we've been thinking about more intentionally. All these things are things we've been thinking about more intentionally. The other thing is worship. We have 5 services on a Sunday. You know how many that is? It's 5. Senior warden, that's what qualified him. 5. So why is that? Because we believe we need more and more ways for folks to plug in. And the way we do it here is, we bring a little business school, right? Market differentiation, right? We have the 7:30, service, which is no sermon and no music, in and out, half an hour, very meditative. We have the 8 o'clock, right, 8:45, whenever it is, right down the middle, right to. We have a high mass at 11 that's a little different still. We have the Come As You Are. Who's been to that service? Nobody's been to, yeah, you have. Kristen, you have. I know some of you. Kelly, you have. Come on, raise your hand. Come on, right? And that service is different still in that it's very laid back. It's not as liturgically designed. And then finally, we have evensong. And we just wanted to create tons of avenues where people could come to church. And all of these services are going year-round. Right, so people can be, so they're not an event, they're a pattern. When you don't run them year-round, then they become an event. Oh, we have evensong the first Sunday of the month. That is an event, right? We have evensong every single Sunday night, even in July, even in August. The choir loves it in August, wearing those hot robes. They're digging it. Suffering, we're trying to engage them in suffering of the broader community. The other thing I'll get to this in a minute. So that is something that we have been very intent on in the period in which we're at. And also that nobody has to miss church. We're getting that recorded. Nobody has to miss church. So that's another thing we've stepped into. The other thing is our operational focus. So the staff here thinks a lot about our job not just being programmatic, but being capable of responding. And so we have 2 things that we're always doing all the time. One is keeping the train on the tracks, right? Keeping the ship running. And I have to say, they're very, very good at that. We have a very mature, very capable, very connected staff that know exactly what they're doing, even when they're not here. Like, I don't know how many texts I've already gotten this morning from Diane in France, right? Pulling the strings overseas, but that's good. But the more important thing, and this is the thing that I have to say that we're pretty good at and we think about is our capacity to work as a team and shift and change at a moment's notice, right? To sort of step up and do things that we need to do based on what's happening in the world. That whole Ukrainian lunch thing that we had in here was an example of that. A lot of what happens here is something that we didn't anticipate and we didn't plan and that we're capable of pulling off. That big AI conference we did here is an example of that. The Art of Grief that Nicola is doing is an example of that. There's just, and so we feel like our capacity to be responsive is very important. To work as a team, to be clear, to be connected, to be communicative with one another is part of how we think about what we do. So we just got back from our staff retreat when we got to use the vibe. That's what we talked about. Programmatic stuff, we're good at. I mean, we have to get better at it. We always iterate and stuff, but we know how to do that. The question is, can we act, shift, and change in a world that is dynamic? And things in a world where there's a lot of disruption happening, it generally looks like that, right? That's, don't see it, sense it, don't see it, boom, over the edge, right? And we always have to be ready to be there as a staff, right? And so everything we do up to that point is being prepared as a team to respond to whatever the world throws at us. Because the church is the backstop. The church is not going anywhere. We are not going anywhere. We are here because we're rooted to God. And that is our driving orientation operationally. Am I right, Laura? Laura's like, what? I've never heard this. I'm the chief of staff. What's going on? Typical. So we think a lot about that operationally. Any questions or thoughts on that? This is also a big one, generational shift. We think a lot about this too. I do in particular. Oh, I'm sorry, George. Oh, I don't know. Maybe it does. I don't know. I guess not. But we think a lot about generational shift as well, and we're seeing that. We are seeing more sort of millennials and even homelanders, or I don't know what they call them. What are those? Born after 2005, Generation Z, or Alpha generations. We're seeing more of that community start coming around the church. And the thing that's really interesting, and this goes back to worship in our 5 services, is there's a significant loss, particularly with my generation, what am I, Generation X? Is that what we are, Kate? Generation X, is the loss of confidence in institutions. Right? And so, and these young people, a lot of these alpha generation or millennials grew up with parents that didn't trust institutions, didn't go to institutions and talk well about institutions, voted for people that were anti-institutional, right? And that's a wobbly world, particularly when you see the effect that it's had on their parents or the generation before them. And so they're starting to look back. They're looking for something stable, something institutionally solid and consistent that they can trust. And that's hard, right? Especially when you say we're Christians, right? Because in the world of Christianity, there's some big gaps. We talked about that, right? With Michael Curry and the Civil War and preaching Old Testament stuff in the face of slavery, right? So, but we're starting to see him circle around the church a little bit, right? And so we think how we talk about Jesus and what we do here is very important, to have a stable team. And we're seeing them start to come in a little bit, the millennials. And we're seeing like young folks, particularly a lot of young men, actually, to be honest, who are coming to church without their parents, right? Which is so, like, what the heck, right? And so this summer we have a college Bible study for young folks that are home from college. It'll really be a theological conversation, sort of a rambling, like all of my conversations, a rambling. Kyler knows what I'm talking about. Kyler's like, oh, good Lord. And because he sat through those. And, he's a great example of that. We have this little group. What do we call the fireside chat group? Yeah, and we talk about these issues. We also have a 20s and 30s group that's gathering, and so making a lot of space for conversation with these communities, particularly in the face of uncertainty, and honestly naming it, and also how we get to respond to it. Small groups. Thinking a lot about small groups. Kate's small group. That's where we build relationship and safety, and finally spiritual exercises, and sort of doubling down on that more and more. So this is how we've been thinking very intentionally about a year and a half back, maybe 2 years, about what the church looks like, this church looks like, and how we operate in this church in a world that's shifting and changing and pulling apart. The great thing about a church is we know we're going to be here for a very long time. We know what's going to happen every single Sunday. We have a very good calendar. It's part of our spiritual experience, and so it allows us to prepare. Right? System set, and it allows us to do stuff like this very intentionally in response to things that we consider to be big shifts. So I'll leave it at that. Any reflections or questions or comments or inconsistencies or anything about where we sit as a church right now? Epiphany, our church, us. Yes, Mike. Mike asked about taking relata out to the broader community. Well, first of all, it's become, I think, a verb, right? So when we say, hey, we're going to gather with the Ukrainians and have a relata-style conversation, it has already become a cult. People are like, oh, I know what that is, right? So Debbie Anderson-Brooke is, in fact, taking this on. She's stepping in sort of as an executive director of relata, and hopefully over the summer we're going to run one more iteration beta test through the fall that Kate's going to be leading. And then we hope to take it out, relata for the community, relata for Christians, maybe relata for business, are the three that we're looking at doing. So do you see other communities basically taking almost like a franchise? Absolutely like a franchise. It'll be the McDonald's of Christianity. I wish, right? How successful would that be? That's the plan. We're trying to organize it so it's easy to hand off. Yeah. Other thoughts or reflections on this, George?
You years ago made some comment about if all Christian churches preach the way we do, the world would be more attuned. I'm not saying it right, but so what between that concept and advertising a lot on buses, what can we do to kind of get the rest of Seattle to say, hey, over here. Come to one of our 5 services and say, oh, this is better than
right. So two responses to that. George said, well, if every church preached like Epiphany, nobody'd come here. They'd go to all those other churches. I'd be completely out of a job. But I think there's 2 things I think about. The first thing I think about is a little broader than Epiphany. I believe if every monotheistic tradition practiced their religion as designed, we wouldn't have a problem. We don't do it. If Islam did, if Christianity did, if Judaism did, I mean, I'm not seeing it in Israel right now, the practice of Judaism or Islam or Christianity, right? I mean, so I would say if we really just practiced our religion, the world would be better. And I'm not even like playing it against Epiphany. But what I would say with Epiphany is Brian Filer, who runs this, and he's probably back there, maybe somewhere, I don't know where Brian is, we're doing a lot more shorts, multimedia stuff to send out. So there's 2 things I'd ask of you. Send our stuff out and invite people in and invite them to come with you. And don't invite them once. Because if you invite them once, it's an event. And this is what they'll say when you invite them to Evensong. Any of your friends who you know will come with you to Evensong, I already could tell you what the response is going to be to Evensong. They're going to say, this was really good. This was well done. You know why? Because you self-selected to get them here, and they know good when they see it. But they see it as an event, not a service. So bringing people once is like taking them to Les Mis. You don't go to Les Mis every week. You go to Les Mis once. But Evensong's a service, not an event. And so Charlie Bush, the late great Charlie Bush, was one of the great examples of this. Keep bringing them back. If they say, oh, Kyler says to me, oh, I loved it. I say, great, I'll pick you up next Sunday, 5:15. Meet you then. Right? Oh, I'll pick you up next Sunday. Meet you then. Oh, I'll pick you up next Sunday. Meet you then. Because it's not an event. Bill.
We saw this morning this paper what looked like a flash of Christian nationalism. This seems to be something that we're being confronted with. The name Christian means different things to different people.
Right. Which is why with Relata we're doing, this is what it looks like to be a Christian. Right? This is how we act as a Christian. And which is why you got to bring your friends. Right? And you got to forward them our shorts or whatever. You got to bring them in to say this place is what it looks like to be knit together. Donald, do you have a question?
More of an observation.
Sir.
Just contemporary secular media, I mean contemporary like today, it's so full of the lack of relationship and what people are eating out of life and finding empty of everything that's going on in the world. People like trying to live a normal life, but knowing there's all this craziness. So am I wrong? If I can live normal, it's just amazing. I just want to applaud Epiphany and you on how advanced and how far ahead you were with establishing Mulata. Because I read these things now a year and a half later, and I'm like, oh my God, that's Mulata.
Right.
You know, we need to use that as an example of pulling people in.
So you're going to see now all over town, United Chamber of Connection, or come here for this neighborhood dinner, or pay this to do this. There's an open market niche for rebuilding a community that you will see people like running at all over the place. And when I see that, I think we've been at this for 2,000 years. And we have a scheduled time, I call it a scheduled play date to see your friends. If you come every Sunday over time, every Sunday you'll see the same people over and over again, right? And these are people you develop a relationship with. And if you do it for a long time and then you drop dead at 54 like Bob Barnes did, you have a room full of 400 people who love you like crazy because they went to church with you, right? And that's a beautiful thing, to be deeply connected with the community that anybody can belong to. That's the other weird thing. There's not many communities that anybody can, even the library, you need a card to get in. I'm thinking of getting a card here, swipe card. Lex?
So I'm very interested in the generational shift piece. The Pew Research Group did a recent survey in Gen Z that found that these folks in Gen Z, the narrative is, oh, they're done with institutional church. They don't want to go to institutional church. But what they're finding, what the Pew Group found, is that they're very interested in what we call we're spiritual but not religious. And Pew says, and I agree with this, that presents an opportunity for the church.
Yeah.
And so we need to focus on what that means to tap into that desire for spiritual connection with spiritual realities in a way that speaks into that language.
Sure.
Rather than just trying the same old thing over and over again.
Right.
And that's why I think we're seeing, in that generation in particular, a want for tradition, to be grounded in tradition. And the tradition is, back to Bishop Curry, the tradition is one of our great strengths. And there's a great church historian who taught at Yale for many years named Yaroslav Pelikan, who said that tradition is the living faith of the dead, and traditionalism is the dead faith of the living. And what the church has done too often, not just the church, it's out in the secular world too, is the worship of traditionalism.
Uh-huh.
And that is dead.
Yes.
But the tradition is what I think
Is
we're all hungry for tradition, but
Right.
young people in particular are hungry for tradition.
And they can sniff it out.
They can sniff it out.
They can.
I don't think it's that they're not religious.
Right.
But what's happened in our culture is that religion has become and been equated with civic religion. It's not really what you've been talking
It's a huge failure.
It's a huge failure. And so nobody, we have people close to us who their whole lives grew up with a notion that Christianity is what is civic religion going on right now, which doesn't feel like Jesus at all.
Exactly.
And so I think people are religious, have a desire to be religious,
Yeah.
just not a desire to be civic Christians, if you know what I mean.
And we have to show them what it looks like as leaders, right? I mean, I know priests that don't pray. And I can't even put my mind around that. It's like a cardiologist that smokes, right? Yeah, it's so being authentic in the system. Final thoughts, Ross?
What counsel would you offer us when things don't go the way we hope they're going to go? What do we do?
When things don't go the way we hope they're going to go. And this is what I would say. Hope only has one place to land. God. If we hope in anything else, I can guarantee we will be disappointed, right? But if we hope that we work, like suffering produces endurance, endurance produces character, character produces hope, and hope is grounded in the love of God in the name of Jesus Christ. And so that's why Bonhoeffer could do what he did, right? That's why Desmond Tutu could do what he did. That's why Harriet Tubman could do what she did. They had this hope grounded in God, that the thing they were up against, right, that huge wall, right, that Adolf Hitler or whatever the thing is that's sitting in front of you, that thing would never stop this thing. And if I die, it doesn't matter. Why? Because I end up in the same place that I am right now. And that's what the martyrs knew. Right, that they're going to end up in the same place that they are right now, and that is in the embrace of God. And if we recognize that now, that means that we go right through this because we hope in the only thing worthy of hope, which is Jesus Christ, right? And that's what we have to share, right? In a time of distress, in a time of anxiety, in a time of division, that's the thing. And there is nothing else. Zero. When we don't know what our job is, like the preacher was talking about this Sunday, like we have something else that we are connected to. And that's why good guys always win. Ultimately, the good guy will win. However you define that good guy, I'm not going to define that for you. I guarantee it. That's all. Hear, hear. Let's say a prayer, and then then I got to go to church. God, for our time together, for the blessing of the folks that have gathered, for the wonderful way you're holding this little parish here to do our job, right? To be the backstop, to be present, to be ready, right? To serve you, to be grounded in you. And with that, all our confidence, all our hope remains in the Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen.